Margaret Beaufort, manipulator, maybe murderer, just power hungry? Who is this woman? In this video, it is my pleasure to have with me my good friend and amazing historian and author, Lauren Johnson, who just wrote a biography on Margaret Beaufort. So let's discuss how important this woman truly was in English and maybe in European history. Lauren, thank you so much for being here.
Thank you so much for having me here. It's lovely.
It's my pleasure, honestly. You are a fantastic historian. You have written many books before. So who is Margaret Beaufort?
Margaret Beaufort. So firstly, for me, I think she is one of the most interesting women in history. And I think she has unfairly, first of all, been forgotten and then in recent years been misremembered, I think, personally. I think she's kind of been presented as being this sort of scheming weirdo. I mean, that's the long and short of it. This very unusual, almost Oedipal mother to her son, Henry VII, the first Tudor king. And also, I think, often been seen solely through that lens, like her relation to a man. And what I think is most interesting about her instead is she is a woman of a very unusual time in history, the Wars of the Roses, who kind of represents and then exceeds in some ways all of the other women around her. That she is like constantly in communication with them, she's learning from them, she's being a friend to them, a relation to them. And then she becomes like this ultimate survivor, really, of the Wars of the Roses. And without her, I think I can say this definitively, without Margaret Beaufort, there are no Tudors, as far as I'm concerned.
Wow, that's such a strong statement, but I actually love it. Without Margaret Beaufort, there's no Tudors.
Yeah. Firstly, like just genealogically, so she is very unusual. Like she's the only child of her father who dies when she's, in fact, less than a year old. So she's the only one with that specific sort of bloodline coming down, which she passes on to her only child, who she gives birth to when she's 13, the person who becomes Henry Tudor. Yeah,
Crazy.
I mean,
13 as well.
I can go into that for literal hours. I have so many opinions, so many thoughts. And then, so there's that, like literally she is the blood claim to the throne because they're descended from Edward III, blah, blah, blah. Lots of people were descended.
John of Gaunt?
Yes, exactly. Yeah. John of Gaunt's relationship with Catherine Swynford, their children become the Beauforts.
Yes, exactly.
But also, she is able to manoeuvre and manipulate a situation when it arises with the accession of Richard III, this very unexpected situation that comes about. And she enables her son to be the person who becomes the kind of figurehead of the resistance to Richard. And also, I think, which hasn't really been researched before, she's funding it. Like, she's ploughing money into her son's campaign so that he can actually get to England with an army and beat Richard. So, like, yeah, I just think...
She's behind it all.
Yeah, I think so. Yeah.
She's the mastermind behind it all. That is...
Yes. She's like the head of the conspiracy, she's called, by one source at the time. And yet, I think because she becomes the mother of the king, and that's quite a sort of tricky situation for a woman at this time, quite an unusual situation, really. I think she sort of just is left out a little bit of the official histories. I think they're a bit cautious of saying too much about her. And as a result, she gets forgotten. Like, she's not even in Shakespeare, which I find insane. We've got Margaret of Anjou, that incredible she-wolf imagery. We've got Joan of Arc, even, who really has very little to do with English history. And yet no Margaret Beaufort. What is this?
That is insane. That really is insane. Let's go back a little, because I think here you touched upon so many interesting points. She's a Plantagenet, in a way.
Yeah, I have a real, just very briefly, of the many bees in my bonnet. Buzz, buzz. I have a real bee in my bonnet about Richard III being the last Plantagenet. I'm like, no, he's not. There's loads of them. There's so many people who also have Plantagenet blood in their veins.
Yeah.
Like, why do we get so
Even
stuck
Margaret
on this?
Paul, right? Margaret Paul is a Plantagenet. The Paul, obviously. That's so interesting. You know, I often compare, well, it is different, because I think the fact that she's going through so many wars, it is totally different. But I compare her often to Louise of Savoy, the mother of Francis I. I often say that in a way she's our French Margaret Beaufort. But it is actually quite wrong to say it, like, because talking to you, I realize now that obviously Margaret had to go through so many wars. There's not that in France. Like, you know, there's no... I mean, she positioned Francis as the rightful heir, but there's no, like... You know, there's no battles. There's no... So in a way, it's quite different. She's not funding, you know, Francis, you know, war, which I didn't know. I didn't know that Margaret did that.
It hasn't really been much spoken about, I don't think. And it is partly because what we're talking about when we're talking about her, like, leading a conspiracy is exactly that. Like, this is a completely secret operation that they're having to negotiate at that time, because if it is uncovered that Margaret Beaufort is helping rebel against the king, which Richard III is by that point, then that's treason. Like, she almost loses absolutely everything in the first rebellion against Richard. She loses her liberty. She's sort of kept with her husband Thomas Stanley up in the northwest. He gets to choose all her servants. Her estates have already started to be sort of like siphoned off to Richard's followers, so she's losing everything. But because she has these decades of ties with people across the whole kingdom, these ties of like mercantile, financial connections, people who've been funding her household, you know, providing her with silk and cushions and things that like we almost just think of as, oh yeah, that's just part of their house. But those people, like, their entire livelihood depends on Margaret continuing to have business with them. And similarly, like, the citizens of London, the leading merchants there, the ones who are in Calais, where we know she later visits, she has connections across the Channel, all across the whole kingdom, basically, north, south, east, west, Wales, everywhere. And these people who are like, we're in a very unstable situation. Do we keep supporting Richard III, or do we maybe, you know, give a little bit of help to Margaret Beaufort, who's helped us so much in the past? Do we just, like, keep in with her in the possibility that she comes back to power? And I think that's probably what she was relying on, and that's how she gets these sums of money, which are presented in sources as coming from men. But, like, there is absolutely no way, when you look at how these men are connected to each other, that Margaret Beaufort is not involved in this. And this money then gets to Henry and ensures he is able to invade. Because, like, if you don't have money, you can't pay soldiers. You can't pay mercenaries, certainly, which is what Henry's using. You can't get ships to get your forces across the Channel. You can't get arms. You can't get armaments. Like, you need money, and she has it.
And that's so interesting. Also, so... unusual, right? Like, she seems to be very much in charge of her own destiny. Am I right to say that?
Yeah, I think so. And I think with Margaret, that's one of the, like, main through lines of her whole life story almost, is that right from her childhood, she has a sense of, I don't think it's exceptionalism. I don't think she sees herself as better than other people. I just think she sees herself as having a voice. And so she is able to say, for instance, when she's like 8, 9 years old, there's conversations about who she's going to marry. And we know from sources later on from her confessor, John Fisher, that she specifically, like, says who she wants, who she chooses based on, she believes, a vision at the time. We know that later, like very shortly after, literally within 2 months of giving birth to Henry Tudor, when she is still a child physiologically, she is like traversing the country in order to arrange another marriage to take control of her future by doing that. Within a year of her next husband dying, a man that she definitely was, like, if not in love with, definitely there was real, genuine affection and partnership there. She again takes control of her future by marrying. And I think right at the end of her life, in the last 10 years, she chooses to become what's called a vowess, which is... it's almost like a nun, but your husband's still alive.
Yeah.
So you get to control everything, but you don't have to, you know, get rid of your husband. And I think that's like, sometimes that's read backwards as, you know, that she's always been controlling or she's never liked her husband or whatever. And I think actually it's just that it's kind of the natural end point for her of the reality by that point, which is that she has so much power, so much authority, so many lands that she's overseeing, that she's like, no, I just want to be doing this myself.
I think that's what it makes it so incredible for her. As you said, like, she's so exceptional, because I can't think of many. I mean, there are other women, especially at the time. You know, I think the 16th, 15th, 16th century shows you like so many strong women. But with that much power, that much money, that much land, I don't know. I feel like she's really at the top. She's really in the 1% of these women, you know, who are. And it's crazy that she's so much. Why do you think she can be so much in control? Why do you? Is it because she's the only daughter of her father? Do you think that's why?
That's a really good question. I don't know if it's her father so much as her mother.
Yeah.
And again, I feel like the women in her life have tended to be left out because, like, there is very little available to us. And there's so much, like, having to read across sources and contextualize things. And, like, you know, from your own histories of women, you're having to fill these gaps with your own interpretation based on a lot of wider reading. And we have to do that with Margaret and the women around her. But when she is a child, Margaret, as soon as her father's dead, legally she belongs to the king, and he can give her as a ward to anyone he wants, and legally that guardian could then physically remove her from her family, have her grow up with them. And that doesn't happen. And it's interesting it doesn't happen, I think, because Margaret's mother won't let it happen. That she is similar to Margaret. She's very savvy. She gets married a lot. Unlike Margaret, she has a lot of children as well. And she is very protective of Margaret and keeps her with her right until the point Margaret marries, possibly for the second time when she's 12. And I think that it's from her mother that Margaret sees how you kind of navigate this really complicated situation as a noble woman at this time. That you have to simultaneously be female enough to seem humble and subservient, and yet dominant enough to actually control.
And to be respected, right?
Yeah, to control hundreds of people who need to be paying you the rent, paying you the tolls on the road, listening to you when you tell them what to do. Like, it's a really uneasy balance for a woman, and I think Margaret sees her mother do it.
Successfully.
Yeah, very successfully. Sometimes too successfully, like she annoys an abbot at one point. As all powerful women do.
That's amazing. And you know, like by listening to you, I just see like so many parallels between Margaret Beaufort and Elizabeth I. And, you know, I feel like she's given that to basically the Tudors, right? Maybe even Mary the First as well. You know, like I think it's incredible, like the amount of similarities between these strong
women. And so it's interesting actually you say that, because Margaret Beaufort also helps bring up her grandchildren. Like, she is around for a lot of her grandchildren's lives, especially because their mother dies relatively young. Elizabeth of York dies in 1503. And at that point, the future Henry VIII, Princess Mary, Princess Margaret, they are around Margaret and learning from her. And we know as well that Margaret, with Elizabeth, really tried to protect the daughters in that family. Like, she really tried to make sure they weren't married off too early. And so they would have had this memory of Margaret and how she was as a lord, effectively, at this time, and how they would have conceived it. And maybe some of that sort of seeps down, because it is interesting, isn't it? Like, that generation are very unusual as princes and princesses. The kind of romantic element to them, the strong will and sense of their own, like their right to choose almost what they want to do.
Yeah, she's the mother of the Tudor dynasty.
Yeah, without a doubt.
It's incredible everything you're saying, because now I can see like all our influence throughout the 16th century. But now I think there's a question that everyone, you know, wants to know. You know, it's about the Princes of the Tower. What happened to them? I'm going to call this, you know, the disappearance. But do you think she has anything to do with it?
No.
No, me neither.
There we go. Done.
No, I don't see it either. I do not see her doing anything.
I think I cannot understand how it is possible to look at the contemporary sources, and I'm not talking about Shakespeare, I'm not talking about what's written when the Tudors come to power, I'm talking about literally what's happening in the 1470s, the 1480s, up to the end of Richard's reign. I don't see how you can look at that stuff and not see that Richard III is responsible for their disappearance.
Really?
It is so utterly clear to me. Like, why? I don't think it's a case of like he's this mad, power hungry spider creature who's, always plotting. I think he perceives himself as threatened. I think he is probably at points reactive and is just trying to like get rid of enemies before they get him. And, that's probably fair. Maybe some of the people who he gets rid of would have come for him. But I think it is him. And I think the degree to which everyone sort of is scrambling around in the summer and autumn after Richard III takes the throne suggests how unexpected his accession is. And if it's that unexpected, like the notion that there was already a kind of groundswell of dissatisfaction with the princes or a suspicion that they were illegitimate or whatever, like, no, I don't think that's there. I think what we have is very, very simply a factional division within the court between the Woodville faction and the non-Woodville faction, effectively.
And Margaret Beaufort wasn't on the Woodville faction?
Not really.
No?
So she is only part of the Woodville faction
After.
Sort of by extension, I would say. So at the time Richard III takes the throne, Margaret is married to Thomas Stanley, who is this arch equivocator. I mean, genius at like playing all the sides and just coming out on top himself. Partly because he has enormous armies of his own, so he's able to, effectively he's strong-arming people and being like, well, maybe my army won't help you in the future if you annoy me right now. And I think Margaret has that in her as well. I think probably that's why the marriage worked, is that both of them are just very practical.
Yeah.
And they both have had issues, well, particularly the Stanleys have had issues with Richard III in the past. They've also had issues with the Woodvilles.
Okay.
So and with both of them, they have had to kind of find a status quo and, live alongside each other despite not really liking each other. And I think that what Margaret really wants in 1483 is for her son to come home, because he's been in exile for more than a decade. She wants him to come back, and in order to do that, she had come up with this solution with the previous King Edward IV, that Henry could come and marry Elizabeth of York, his daughter, the eldest child. And with Edward's death, and particularly with Richard's accession, that is like completely blown out of the water. There's no way Henry VII is going to be like Henry Tudor, is going to go, oh yeah, great, my bride's in sanctuary hiding from her uncle. Yeah, she's illegitimate. Great, perfect bride. Let me come back immediately and risk my life. So I think Margaret sees that Richard acceding is not great, but that she is willing to work with him, and that Stanley is willing to work with him. So there isn't, I think with Margaret and actually with the country at large, I think there is very quickly a suspicion that Richard has done something to the princes.
Yeah.
And we know from Dominic Mancini, the Italian writer who writes down his report by the end of 1483, but who seems to have left England before Richard's coronation, that already there were stories about the princes having potentially been killed. We know already, like, there had already been a king killed in the Tower, lest we forget. Henry VI was undoubtedly, I think, murdered in the Tower of London. People remember that. That's only 12 years earlier.
Yes.
And he had been a child king, so there's further, connections there. And there are these great big rebellions that occur throughout July, August, before the Buckingham Rebellion that everyone remembers, and in which one account says that 50 people are executed for being involved in that plot.
Yeah.
It's strange that we don't know more about it, but it's like that suggests to me there is this huge groundswell of resistance to Richard right from the moment he is trying to take power.
Yeah.
And, it's not always the case, of course, that the mass of people are correct, but it is interesting how quickly everyone's like, no, he's killed him. Like, that doesn't suggest to me someone who has a reputation as being a lovely, sweet, pious, out for other people figure. That suggests to me someone who already has a reputation that then makes people believe that he has done this. And there is nothing, not a single thing to me that suggests Margaret Beaufort would have any interest in doing anything with those princes except putting them back on the throne until we get to the position of, okay, the princes are probably dead. Richard's very unpopular. How to unite these very disparate groups? Okay, it could be Henry.
So basically, what you're saying, if I'm understanding correctly, Margaret Beaufort would have had no interest in the throne if Richard III had not taken
Yeah.
the throne. So basically, she would have respected Edward V as the next king, and she would have never tried. That's very interesting because, you know, when you listen to the detractors, everyone is saying that's because she wanted to put her son on the throne. But in 1483, I don't think that's the case, is it? Like,
No, it's really counter to her interests for Edward V to be removed.
Okay, so that in itself shows that, you know, but what comes next is it's her relationship with Richard III. That means that then she's like, okay, no, and almost like there's an opportunity, right?
Yeah.
Because there's so much discontent, and here there's an opportunity for her son to be the figure of the resistance. Am I understanding correctly?
Yeah, exactly that.
Okay,
Yeah.
then that makes total sense that she can't have done anything to the princes.
Yeah, there's no way. And then when Henry VII actually takes the throne, by that point it's 18 months after these boys have disappeared. Like, surely, if there was any possibility of them being anywhere else, something would have come up.
Yeah.
And I don't, unfortunately, I like, as important and as worthy as I think it is, absolutely, to be continuing to investigate other archives and to be extracting more information and filling out our picture. I don't yet personally, and other historians I think feel similarly, I have not seen anything at all that is compelling evidence of any of the princes having escaped.
No, there is evidence. There's like people believe or want to believe or pretend to believe that, you know, they could be them because it's a power play. It's about removing Henry VII.
Yes.
It's about his dynasty. But I do not see anything else. Even from the evidence we have. But as you said, I'd be happy to be wrong. I'd be happy to be proved wrong. I'd be happy. So we want the research to continue, but so far we have to, like, there's no evidence. Even the chain of Edward V being in, for me, is no evidence.
Yeah.
Either
loads
way.
of people have Edward V's
that Richard
chain.
III is the murder, for sure, and that's not, there's no evidence. But it's the same with the letters that says, yes, he's that's not. Again, I think it's a power play. So I think it's good that we state that. Like, I think it's important.
Yeah, I think, like, you have to follow the evidence, and I also think we will all have biases. Historians have biases because we're humans, as everyone else. But we also, exactly as you say, try to put the bias aside when looking at the evidence.
Yeah. There's nothing that really proves anything for sure, and that's a given. It is very clear that Lauren has spent decades researching this incredible woman, and as she said, without her we don't have the Tudor dynasty. I think it's an incredible statement to make. But also, in her book, she proved it to be right. I really hope that you will consider getting a copy of this amazing biography on Margaret Beaufort. Thank you so much for watching.